Welcome back, friends. And we want to let you know what's going on the Bem Go Blue podcasts. Already out, the radio replay of Michigan football. I was joined on Monday night, obviously, by head coach Sharon Moore, Tony Alford, the running backs coach, and Donovan Edwards. Make sure you get a chance to listen to that one. If you missed anything or if you just want to listen again, we understand. Defend the Block. That is out as well. That's featuring Will Cheddar from the basketball program, and still to come on Thursday, we've got a Conquering Heroes, and we're going to feature field hockey this week. So make sure that you tune into that one. And then the preview edition of In the Trenches will go live. That's the keys to the game, and a little bit of a locker room speech as we enter the Big Ten season against, yes, new Big Ten opponent, USC. That will go live at 5 o'clock on Thursday. So make sure you tune into everything that's going on. And now I want to bring in my partner. You can see him there. If you're watching on Michigan's MGO Blue page or on my Twitter, that is Brian Boesch. Mr. Boesch, how are you?
I'm great, John. Happy Big Ten play. Really been fun getting to do some of these streams with you. We've got Jack Miller coming up on the audio or on the video side. Audio side, we'll have a great conversation coming up a little bit later with Kalel Mullings. But yeah, been fun to get this going. And hey, Big Ten play, it has some special oomph to it. So we'll break it all down. We did talk about it on the pregame show and throughout the course of the broadcast on Saturday. Mentioned it. You did on the Inside Michigan Football radio show. But one more time, the Greg Harden loss from late last week, I can't put into words what he meant. And I mentioned it on Saturday, the coincidence, the irony, whatever you want to say. He thrived for student athletes in a lot of situations, but especially for football. He thrived in weeks like last week. Michigan coming off a loss in a spot they hadn't been in very much. That was the type of week where Greg Harden really, truly was at the peak of his powers as the secret weapon of the athletic department. So such a gut-wrenching loss for the program, the athletic department, the community, but really, really well done by the entire Michigan athletic staff. I know Jake Stocker, the entertainment czar for the program, did great work with the moment of applause and cheering for him. The decals on the winged helmets, the shirts, it was really well done in a tough situation. Yeah,
a great man. And for as many, you can never talk about Greg Harden enough, what he meant to the student athletes, to the coaches, to the administration, and even those up on the Hill. When you start to dig a little deeper into the influence that he had on campus, you're amazed, because he was never a guy that was looking for credit, but he was always the individual that everybody around the university, not just the athletic department, would turn to for guidance. And he was just, I keep talking about the same thing, but he helped so many people. But when he was talking to you, you felt like you were the most important person in his life. And for him to be able to go through, all of those different things and all of those different situations and be so mindful of everybody involved. It was, and his memory was second to none.
Truly was. So we will miss G. Thoughts to the Harden family. And again, we will keep him in our thoughts as we go into the Big Ten opener. And to do that, let's get into our 7 from 77. And hey, it's going to be a fascinating week around the program. And certainly it started with a unique spot as we get into on number 1 on our 7 from 77. Sharon Moore, the head coach, did not waste any time announcing Alex Orji as the starting quarterback on Monday on our show in his press conference. Are you surprised at the timing of that announcement? And what can Michigan fans expect from Alex Orji with an opportunity, we presume, to play an entire game as the starting quarterback for the first time?
I'm not really surprised that he made that announcement on Monday. He could have held that as a secret and, told the team, told the coaches, made that decision internally, and then not announced it until, moments before kickoff. He did that for the first game, and he knew that whether it was him on Monday or the players throughout the course of the week, we're all going to be asked that question. So let's take it off their plate. Let's go ahead and talk about it. And he made that decision, made that announcement. So I'm not surprised at all. And I mean, I don't think anyone is surprised. One of the things that he talked about coming out of fall camp was the importance of protecting the football. And not every interception is the same. Not every turnover is squarely on the quarterback, but ultimately he is responsible for it. And it wasn't trending in the right direction. 1 in the first game interception, 2 in the second, 3 in the third. It just wasn't going the direction that he wanted to see this program, this offense go. And so he made the change. And I think you're going to see obviously more quarterback runs. There's no secret there. We're not breaking news with Alex Orji under center or in the shotgun. But I think it puts a defense in much more conflict. If you're looking to run the ball more, obviously your quarterback becomes a huge weapon in that realm, but it also opens things up for Donovan Edwards, for a Khalil Mullins, because it's going to hold that edge defender, backside edge, backside linebacker. They're going to have eyes on Alex Orji, because if they don't, he's going to make them pay for big yardage. So, some of those cutback lanes probably be a little bit bigger. They may not have as many guys front side or loading the box as much. So it's really going to come down to, can he show that he's a passer? He's got the 2 touchdowns, but one was a dump off in the first game to Donovan Edwards, the other one to Hogan Hansen, the tight end. And you could see in both of those the conflict it puts on the edge. Do I cover, running back and tight end, or do I pursue the quarterback? And in both of those, they pursued the quarterback, so he dumped it off. If they don't, he probably carries it in for a score. So that's the type of conflict that you want to see a defense be in if you're going to try and give yourself an advantage offensively.
Is there much of a competitive advantage from the USC side that this came out? I mean, it's not like there's a ton of film out there on Alex Orji playing quarterback. Same with Davis Warren. So is there really much of a difference? People said, why didn't you wait until Saturday? I have to imagine USC was prepping for both, and probably they were slanting toward Alex Orji because of the struggles of Davis Warren.
Well, at some point, and I can understand that, the competitive advantage or disadvantage, at some point, you just have to simply be focused on, what are you doing for your team? How are you handling things for your team? What is best for your team? And, to go ahead and make the announcement again, yeah, there's not a lot of film out there on Alex Orji. There's a little bit. They're not going to go back to high school to see what throws he was good at. So much has changed since then. But it's simply, Michigan has to improve if they're going to ultimately attain the goals that they want, and that's a Big Ten championship and a college football playoff berth for the 4th year in a row. There's a lot of improvement. So it's simply, what do we have to do in program to give ourselves an advantage, and not worrying about what it means to USC or any other opponent down the road.
Number 2 on our 7 from 77, an area where we still aren't exactly sure who the starter will be and how things will look, is under center. We've seen Greg Crippen and Dom Jadis play plenty so far this season. Jadis won the job out of camp. In the Texas game, it was pretty much always him, but we saw Crippen come in pretty early in the game last week against Arkansas State. What'd you see from those two and the O-line as a whole, with those centers shifting around before a much stiffer test this weekend?
Well, both played well, and I think Sharon and Coach Newsome is just trying to figure out, okay, which guy is going to separate from the other. They're both very similar right now, and they have some things that they do well. Jadis is, I think, a little bit of a better athlete. Kripp has more experience, not necessarily game experience, but just experience playing offensive line, because Dom came from the defensive side of things. So when Kripp is in there, there's a little bit more of a calm feeling, and it hasn't necessarily translated into anything, tangible offensively, better or worse. But I do think that there's value in having both guys. So I think they're going to continue rotating centers, and the ultimate goal is to find the guy that gives you the best chance to win, sticking with it so that they can continue to grow as an offensive line.
Number 3 on our 7 from 77. Let's discuss the situation with Colston Loveland and how that has a trickle-down effect to the rest of the skill weapons, to this offense as a whole. You mentioned Hogan Hansen. He had a touchdown catch in that Arkansas State win. Marlon Klein, saw more of him. He's tight end 2 on the fully healthy Michigan depth chart. But it is really tough to replace what Colston Loveland does in a bunch of areas. And, case in point, you look at the numbers. 19 grabs, 187 yards for Loveland through 2.5 games. No pass catcher for the Wolverines has more than 9 catches. And Loveland has racked up 41% of Michigan's receiving yards. So we'll see if Loveland can play. Let's talk about if he cannot. How does that impact? How must others step up within this Michigan offense?
Well, I think some of that goes to why make the change now with Alex Orji, because with the ball in his hands, he can do things by himself. You added an extra blocker if you're going to do things in the run game. But I think, it's expectations for the position, not the player. How many times have I said it on this podcast and different times talking about football? Marlon Klein, you're going to have to step up and make some plays. Hogan Hansen, we saw him do it. Now more is going to be expected, whether it's in the run game as a blocker, in the pass game as a pass catcher. But at some point, somebody in the wide receiver room is going to have to separate. Somebody's going to have to step up and make some plays. And if you're going to be a good team, even if Colston Loveland was healthy, you have to have more weapons. They've got to find better ways and more effective ways of using Donovan Edwards in the pass game. Fred Moore, Samaj Morgan. I mean, you go right down the list, and the opportunity is there. So somebody needs to step up and make some plays.
Number 4 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk about the Michigan defense. Just your takeaways from film from Saturday, and what areas are you focused on heading into Big Ten play and a big matchup with Miller Moss and the Trojans coming up on Saturday?
Well, I think it's really going to come down to, how has the secondary developed? I think Jair Hill had a much better game against Arkansas State than he did, obviously, against Texas or even Fresno State. Amir Hall has stepped up and played well opposite Will Johnson. And I think those are – we've seen Zeke Berry make some plays. Quentin Johnson has made plays. Wesley Walker has stepped up and shown that he can be of value in the secondary. That's really where this defense is going to be tested. I expect, and it needs to be proven against good offensive linemen and good teams, that the defensive front is going to be able to hold their own. In the run game, I'm confident that they will, but they've got to be able to get after the passer. And that will help the secondary as well. You can't stress some of these young guys with the talent that USC has at receiver. You can't stress those guys, time in and time out, but you've got to be able to pressure the passer, and those guys in the secondary are going to have to continue to play at an improved level.
And it feels like, again, that third down mark, which we talked about against Texas, 8 of 10 on third down with the Longhorns in the first half, 10 of 16 for that game. If Michigan has opportunities to get USC off the field, I mean, those plays are going to be highlighted, bolded, underlined.
Well, yes, they will. And, I mean, you look at the opening drive against Texas, you look at the whole first half against Texas, they couldn't get off the field, 8 of 10 conversions for Texas. You look at the first drive against Arkansas State, they had 3 of 3, third down conversions. But it's not just the third down conversions. It's the hit out of bounds that extended that drive. If that doesn't happen, Arkansas State punts, and we're not talking about a field goal kicker that hit one off the uprights. Those are the moments. There were 3 penalties in that game defensively, roughing the passer, and I forget what the third one was, but there was 3 that extended drives for Arkansas State. You can't have those. It's hard enough to stop some of these teams, and it will be against USC. It will be in the Big Ten on third down, given, things being normal. But if you're going to get a stop and then give them a free first down, let them out of jail, it makes it even harder.
Number 5 on our 7 from 77. We'll get your full keys to the game, everything on Thursday afternoon's edition of the In the Trenches podcast presented by Meyer. And first off, heading into this week, for fans coming out, it is a stripe out. First ever at the Big House. So if you're coming to the game, if you're in an odd-numbered section, wear maize. If you're in an even-numbered section, wear blue. Odd section, maize. Even section, blue. Going to be fascinating to see how that looks in the Big House. Maize outs look awesome. I'm super excited for the stripe out there. But I just want to get your feel on everything leading up to this game, the crowd's potential impact. And I think we discussed this at the beginning of the offseason or maybe around spring ball. As much as the novelty of Texas was really exciting because it was week 2, only the second time those two teams had ever played, there is uniqueness to Michigan and USC. But, I mean, Michigan's going to LA next year. USC's in the conference. They could play each other in the first weekend in December now if things break right. This game is more important in the grand schemes than Texas. As frustrating as 2 weeks ago was, if you could only pick one to win, you'd pick this one. And that doesn't mean that excitement, the enthusiasm isn't up for this, but this does have a little bit of a different feel because it's Big Ten play, doesn't it?
Oh, certainly it does. I mean, you think USC, Michigan, this should be January 1st in the Rose Bowl. And now this is going to happen on a regular basis. It's awesome. You get two blue blood programs. And going, first of all, back to the stripe out, I'm going to have to get with Sue to find out what Doug will be wearing, because we all know that she's the one that dresses Doug. So if he's wearing blue, then the big fella is going to be wearing maize and vice versa. So, TBD how the stripe out works in the radio booth. But I think this game is exciting for many reasons, and one of them is just simply you've got two of the most iconic brands, two of the most iconic fight songs. There's so much that is going into this game, and the fact that the first one happens in the Big House, advantage Michigan there, and now it's going to be a matter of how much of an advantage can the fans really create an environment. Which we've seen them do through the last couple of years. We saw them do early on against Texas. Can they create an environment that makes it very hard for USC to make checks at the line of scrimmage? Do we get some offsides penalties, some procedure penalties? Is there communication errors just because the fans are wired at 3:30 in the Big House to make something happen? It's going to be a great environment, and it is. This is the one because it's the start of the Big Ten season. You're setting the tone for the rest of the Big Ten. And, not the rest of the Big Ten, but the rest of the Big Ten season for both schedules. Where does USC go from here? Where does Michigan go from here? Michigan dropped another spot in the polls after the win against Arkansas State. Got to start creeping up at some point. And this is an opportunity for this team. We talk about the big opponents on Michigan's schedule. You lost one to Texas. Now you've got USC, you've got Oregon, Ohio State. Those will take care of themselves, but you're going to set the tone against USC.
All right. It's going to be a tone-setting weekend around Ann Arbor. The way that Jon Jansen sets the tone for a big weekend of football is with a good restaurant. And if you're coming to Ann Arbor, even if you're from our friends out in LA, maybe you're experiencing the beauty that is Michigan and Ann Arbor and Southeast Michigan here this weekend. Jon, you got some restaurant recommendations for our fans?
I do, and shoot, there's a ton of them, but I want to talk about the Main Street Ventures Restaurant Group, and fans can start or end the game, their game day experience at one of the great Main Street Ventures Restaurant Group locations, where they craft sophisticated yet tempting culinary dishes and provide a dining experience that is both vibrant and inviting. This is what they call exemplified excellence. Visit the Real Seafood Company for the freshest fish and seafood, Palio for authentic Italian, Carson's American Bistro for contemporary American cuisine, or my personal favorite, the Chop House for a premium USDA prime steaks and chops. Whatever the craving, these Ann Arbor locations are ready to satisfy your every desire. They offer full bars, extensive wine lists, craft cocktails, delectable desserts, and a cigar bar located at the Chop House. Who doesn't want a victory cigar after the game? At Main Street Ventures Restaurant Group, they strive to offer unmatched hospitality to every guest at every location. Because of them, you're not just a customer, you're their most valued guest. Visit MainStreetVenturesInc.com to select your culinary destination and make a reservation. Come hungry and ready for an unforgettable experience.
So strange how there's a little extra emphasis on the Chop House. We'll have to dig into exactly why that is. Number 6 on our 7 from 77. Let's recap week 3 and do a little look ahead to week 4 of the Big Ten. Plenty of blowouts involving ranked teams going both ways for the league. Alabama crushes Wisconsin in Madison 42-10. Badgers also lose their quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke. Such a shame. That game probably would not have changed the result, but it probably would have been a little bit different had Van Dyke not gone out so early. Notre Dame rolling Purdue and West Lafayette 66-7. And then Oregon dominated Oregon State 49-14 in a non-conference clash. Takeaways from any of those 3 games, Jon Jansen?
Well, the Oregon State game, it's a rivalry game, obviously, and it's been moved to the front of the schedule because it's now a non-conference game for Oregon. But we watched in the first 2 weeks them just not look as crisp or as dominant as you thought. And in this game against Oregon State, that from start to finish, this was a dominant performance. Dylan Gabriel got in the rushing attack as well. And I think they rushed for over 300 yards or 250 yards, and they didn't have any single rusher that was over 100 yards. So they spread the the ball around, and that's dangerous leading into Big Ten play.
And that's an intense rivalry, and as we'll talk about here with some other games of note, Washington lost its former conference, now non-conference September rivalry matchup with Washington State. So I think people who expected a lot of Oregon, me being one of them, I thought they should have come in as the favorite in the Big Ten with all the talent they have, but they did not look good in the first 2 weeks. They did in this one. That's an intense rivalry. So yeah, Washington loses to Washington State. Indiana, they throttle UCLA 42-13. I've been talking about Curt Cignetti and this Hoosiers team is a team that could be, we look up in mid-October and go, wait, Indiana's this record? Their next four: home against Charlotte, home against Maryland, at Northwestern, and then home against Nebraska, which could be fascinating with how those two teams are going. Is Indiana 6-0 going into that game?
Well, all you got to do is Google the coach and find out exactly what he's about. As he let everybody know when he took the job, hey, just Google me. And he has had success. I think the Big Ten is going to be a little bit different, but I'm glad that he welcomed a new Big Ten partner appropriately into the Big Ten, and that they were able to find LA. But when you think about Indiana, and that's a program that is really, it's a mindset, it's a belief. And, Cignetti has gone in there and he's really instilled into his team that they can be a factor in the Big Ten. Now, can they ultimately win the Big Ten? I don't think that they have that. It might be a false belief, but can they be an impact player in regards to, how real it is in Nebraska? Could they be a measuring stick? Michigan goes down to Bloomington. What are they walking into? And all of a sudden, they're going to play some other big teams at the end of their schedule. Can they jump up and beat some of those teams? And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, their last three are Michigan at home, at Ohio State, and then home against Purdue in their rivalry game to finish the season. We talked about this when it was an East-West conversation. Purdue, the year that they played Michigan a couple years ago in the Big Ten championship game, they maximized their potential, right? They took advantage of a weak West to be able to say, hey, we got there. And there were examples of programs that did not quite take advantage. Illinois was one. We were talking about it with somebody before a radio show a few weeks back about, remember that Illinois game in 2022 where, Illinois had Michigan beat, and that might have put them into Indianapolis, and Michigan rallied, the Isaiah Gash game, among others. But in this new look Big Ten, you're right. It's going to be really tough for a lot of teams to get to a Big Ten championship game. But hey, looking at some of these early, 12-team playoff conversation, and I'm not talking about this necessarily with Indiana right now, but just in totality, if you are in that realm of tier 2 in the Big Ten, you are 3rd to 7th, you have an opportunity to get into the playoff. That right there is a chance for, we'll talk about Illinois and Nebraska here in a moment. Take advantage of your opportunities when they present themselves. And the schedule for Indiana has been friendly enough to where they could talk themselves into 6-0 going into Nebraska.
Well, yeah, okay, and then they beat Nebraska. Let's just say they're a 10-2 team at the end of the season. Let's say they lose to Michigan, lose to Ohio State, but then they spank Purdue. Now what do you do with a 10-2 Indiana team? Like that's the conversation that you're going to have. And I'm not predicting that they're going to be 10-2, but I think a 2-loss Big Ten team is going to be in that conversation about should they be in the Big Ten or not. And then you look at the entire schedule and say, well, okay, they lost to their 2 toughest opponents. And that's the conversation that we had about Michigan before USC came out and beat LSU. If they were to go 9-3, you look at the schedule and you look at the record and say, okay, probably not a playoff team, but maybe 3-loss teams at some point do get into the playoffs. But if you lose to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, then do you really belong because they're the toughest teams on your schedule? The same will hold true for Indiana. A 10-2 Indiana, how does that compare with a 1-loss Big 12 team, even though they're not a tough conference in football? Or what does it look like for a 1-loss, ACC team? That's really going to be the conversations as we get closer to playoff time.
And along those lines, really interesting one in the Big Ten coming up after Illinois cruised past Central Michigan at home and Nebraska, they've played really well. They beat Northern Iowa this weekend. So it's ranked on ranked Friday night in Champaign. That is the second biggest Big Ten game. And it really does set up the winner of that game to start at least thinking about, okay, how can we maybe finagle our way into the conversation? When it comes to those, third and fourth tier teams, you're trying to up a tier. Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, they're not thinking national championship, but now with 12 teams, you can think about trying to make your way into the postseason conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Illinois' win over Kansas. Like, how did that prepare them for the matchup and traveling to Lincoln and in Nebraska? We don't really know a lot about Nebraska simply because of their opponents, but Dylan Raiola has come in and lit it on fire and given them hope and that they could be an explosive offense, played in front of an aggressive defense. Like, I mean, anything is possible at this point.
All right. We wrap up our 7 from 77 with some other topics nationally. The big one I want to hit off the top, number 1, Georgia surviving at Kentucky. It was an ugly defensive game, 13-12. Certainly not what I anticipated, especially after how Kentucky had started the year.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about, I mean, okay, so the SEC is unique in there's a lot of tough outs, as there is in the Big Ten, but when when Kentucky forces a team like Georgia into 5 of 13 on third downs, they hold them to 262 yards of offense, and that's without even forcing a turnover against Georgia. Georgia didn't play their A game. They were still able to come out with the win. Kentucky is one of those teams, kind of like an Indiana or a Nebraska right now, that is just going to play you tough. And that's why I say, will those teams that I just mentioned in the Big Ten be able to take down one of the big ones? Not that they'll win the Big Ten or be playing for a Big Ten championship, but that's what's happened with the expansion, with NIL, with the transfer portal, everyone else. It's really spreading out some of the talent, and we're starting to see it when you have a team that comes in, 1-1 in Kentucky, and you're looking at it going, they're not a powerhouse, but they take Georgia to the wire. It was a very exciting game to watch.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, Kentucky was coming off losing 31-6 at home to South Carolina. Both those scores you don't expect to be how they play out, and Kentucky unable to win either of them. Elsewhere, home favorites take the 2 top 25 matchups of week 3. Missouri knocks off Boston College 27-21. I mean, the Tigers, they're pretty darn good. And Kansas State on Friday night last week pounded Arizona 31-7. Texas lost Quinn Ewers, who is questionable this coming week. Arch Manning picked up right where he left off. They win over UTSA 56-7, and LSU nips South Carolina 36-33. That was a bonkers game. Takeaways from those or others last week nationally.
Well, I'm going to go back to the Missouri game. I mean, going into the season, people had picked Missouri to be a really good team. Nobody was picking Boston College, and I think Bill O'Brien has done a great job in his first year there. And I bring that with the context of 27-21. That's a solid performance by Boston College. And now Michigan State this week is going to be traveling to the East Coast to take on Boston College. That's going to be a big time measuring stick for Michigan State, Aiden Childs, Jonathan Smith, to see, coming off of their win, obviously Prairie View, nobody cares about that one, but the win that they had at Maryland. How reliable are those results? Are the improvements that they made from week 1 to week 2 carrying over to a team like Boston College that is playing much better and much tougher than anybody expected?
No doubt. Again, we talked about it with that Illinois-Kansas game before it happened. Those types of matchups for the Big 12 and the ACC are really, really important because they're with where the Big Ten and the SEC is with depth and where they are in rankings. We don't know how the committee is going to view all of this stuff, but those statement opportunities against the teams that aren't considered favorites in some of these leagues, they're incredibly important for right now 3A and 3B in terms of conference pecking order, Big 12 and ACC. Along those lines, 2 games of note that are happening outside of the Big Ten for this weekend. Utah, Oklahoma State, and Stillwater. Classic Big 12 rivalry there.
And it sounds like Cam Rising, with that injury to his hand, might be in the mix again.
Well, I guess for now, hold off on that application for another medical red shirt. And also Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Norman. Both those games featuring 3-0 teams on each side going into their league openers. Different, unique conference matchups, but too fun. We're finally starting to get to where there are some better games throughout college football with 4 ranked versus ranked games this weekend.
Yeah, you're not going to run into, especially now that the SEC and the Big Ten have expanded so much. I don't know that you're going to run into a whole lot of, once you get into conference play, a week or a weekend where there's not a ranked on rank in conference matchup. And that's what makes it fun.
No doubt. All right, that's our 7 from 77. On the audio side, let's bring in an interview with Kalel Mullings. And on the video side, we welcome our friend, Jack Miller, outstanding radio analyst along the network. Looking clean, looking fresh, Jack. What's going on?
Just working. I can't sit in a studio and pontificate about sports all day like some of my best friends, but, always can make time for them, that's for sure.
You're acting like this is
the
room off the house,
my friend.
That's something to be said for that, John. You might be onto something.
I will say, the nice thing that Jack can do in his, big C-suite job that he has Monday through Friday is that it's pretty easy to. What's that?
Windows on 3 sides.
Well, forget that. I'm just saying he can write off some golf expenses. That's the big thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get as much in as I can before the weather turns here. It's like September is the best month of the year now, which is awesome between football and some fall golf. You can't beat it.
How about this? I mean, the weather this weekend looks amazing. I mean, I don't think there's rain in the forecast for like 10 days. Normally, I'd be a little bit superstitious about talking about weather, but I mean, if you're going to have a 5-game homestand to kick off a season, this has been the way to do it.
Yeah, 75 and sunny the entire time. I'll take that. Absolutely.
Yeah,
it was cold in the Texas game. It got down to like 64, right? Everyone's like, my goodness.
Yeah. We were talking about, is it going to be an advantage for Michigan that Texas is going to be cold? I wish it was.
Yeah. We use that 40-degree weather.
The best part was seeing some of the Longhorns fans who were walking around the stadium, and they were legitimately bundled up at 7:30 in the morning. But it was a smidge crisp. All right, so we'll get into it with Jack. Open it up to questions from our viewers on YouTube. If you're watching us on X at Jon Jansen 77, you can always reply to that X post as well. But Jack, I just want to start with the big news from Sharon Moore this week with Alex Orji taking over at the starting quarterback spot. When you heard that news yesterday, your reaction to it happening now and what it could look like for Michigan's offense coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it was the right decision to make at this point. We talked a lot over the last couple of weeks that Davis Warren didn't seem to be the real issue that offense had. He was kind of being a game manager. There were some mistakes in there, but all in all, there were some bigger things that I think that they needed to get corrected. But last week it became apparent that if you can't turn the ball over like that, right? And if you're not the gunslinger type that's high risk, high reward. So you might make some plays doing that, but then there are some things, you can look the other way if that's the case. But when you can't really get the offense going and you start to turn the ball over, coaches are forced to look other places. So here we are going to Alex Orji. And I think, hopefully it gives that offense a spark. We know who he is. We know he's a dynamic runner. There's a lot of question marks surrounding his arm. You would think that the coaching staff, they're with those guys every day. So they must see things in practice that we don't. And maybe that's why it took a little longer to get to this decision. But I think where you're at right now, you're going to need the offense to play well this weekend. And so it's time for a spark and see if number 10 can do it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he brings and what type of, call sheet the coaches are going to have, the offensive coaches. What do you think? What do you want to see from Alex Orji when he takes the field?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing is you have to be a game manager to some extent, right? They're not going to ask him to go out there and light the world on fire and start, an air raid offense. So take care of the ball, be smart with the ball, know where the ball is supposed to be. I'd like to see Kirk Campbell in that offense get a little more creative about getting him outside of the pocket, roll him out, make it pretty easy for him. Hey, there's number 1, there's number 2, and a check down. If you don't like it, just run. Just go grab 3 or 4 yards at a time. Simplify the game, make it a little easier for him to make good decisions. And then when he gets the ball in his hands, he's electric, right? Run like a running back, go run over people. I think if they use him the right way with the running backs that they have, and they can, read options, things like that, that USC probably hasn't seen, or certainly hasn't seen from Michigan to this point in the year, you might be able to find a spark. You might be able to get some things rolling. And we've been questioning it, knowing that those West Coast teams were coming into the Big Ten. Can they match up with the physicality of a Michigan? This is an opportunity to just say, hey, we're just going to run down your throat. We got a quarterback that's going to do it. We got running backs that are going to do it. We're just going to line up and try to play big boy football. And it's another weapon that allows them to do that, hopefully.
Interesting. Just some of the comments. The commenters are kind of split on if it was the right call to mention this on Monday. SW Lion 26, fine with it. Rico didn't like it, saying, why would you tell USC what's going to happen? And then Smash the Numbers Ferris Khan about, motivating the team, announcing him as the QB1, more important than any strategic advantage. Whether it's motivation or just an understanding with a game plan that might have some fluidity with regards to Colston Loveland's status. We'll see how he looks this week and heading into Saturday. To me, that might be, John mentioned it during the 7 from 77 portion, you might need this week to potentially adjust for getting Marlon Klein more reps as tight end 1 if Colston can't go. Hogan Hansen, we saw, a snippet of, and he had the touchdown catch. This is a week where there's probably a little bit more fluidity to everything. How do you see that all shaping out, and what will be important this week in practice when it comes to shaping the entirety of the offense, not just the quarterback spot?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it certainly has. The only issue has not been quarterback play. And so you have an opportunity this week in practice to try to find a few other guys that can help you along the way. I was good to see Fred Moore last week. I thought he had a pretty good game. It's good to see him get in the rotation and come up with a few big catches there. They're going to have to rely on weapons to be smart about getting the ball to, right? It's probably not going to be, hey, stand back in the pocket and let routes develop, and then you're going to go through your route tree and figure out, complex coverages and things of that nature. It's going to be, boom, the ball's out right here. It's a gain of this. I would anticipate a lot of screens, and that's where you can get a guy like Samaj Morgan involved, maybe some of those bubble screens, slip screens, things like that, to just, you almost treat it like a run play. You're hoping to get 3, 4, 5 yards out of it and just keep positive momentum going down the field. Hopefully we start to gravitate towards, besides Colston Loveland, who a few of those guys are. And then you got Donovan back there that hopefully can create a really big play every now and again to stretch the field and extend drives.
And I hope they don't just go, hey, we're going to run it because we want to show that we can run it. We're going to try and put USC in conflict. At some point, you are going to have to go downfield. It can't just be wide receiver screen, running back screen, tight end screen, run with the quarterback. At some point, you're going to have to stretch the defense. And who is it, from a wide receiver standpoint, that you think could be a breakout player against USC?
I'd like to see Fred Moore go for another big game. I think he's been kind of tiptoeing around really becoming an explosive player, runs great routes, pretty sure-handed guy. Young, I think he still has to develop a little bit more and get into that system and understand, get the timing together with the quarterback. And obviously that becomes more challenging when you're rotating guys through there now. But I think Fred Moore's a guy that can do that. I think Klein at tight end is a guy backing up Colston Loveland that, if Colston's still in the game, can probably draw a lot of attention to him. That's a big body guy that can run down the field and be a big target to help a quarterback out. They got a number of them. They just need to start to figure out who those guys are and let them emerge with time. Again, the three of us have talked about this. He had the luxury the last couple of years of not needing to know all those answers until later in the year. It got shoved in our face this year with Texas, as good as they are, coming in, number 2 team in the country, firing all cylinders early. That really forced the issue of, boy, we better get this thing figured out sooner than we thought. Here comes USC, Oregon coming up sooner than later, all of those things. So, you just don't have what you've had the past few years, which is just taking your time and being very methodical about letting everything play out. Somebody's going to have to step out. And like I said, I like Fred Moore and Klein at tight end to do those things, hopefully be those guys.
Offensive line takeaways through 3 weeks. John and I talked about the Greg Crippen, Dom Jadis seesaw at the center position. Just what you've seen, were there strides that were taken when the ones were on the field, when Michigan was really grinding out more than 300 rushing yards against Arkansas State last week?
Yeah, certainly an improvement in week 3 versus the first 2 weeks. You saw a lot of holes being open. You saw a lot of not a lot of missed assignments. You saw guys on the same page with one another. And not only was it the offensive line that I think played better, I think, those running backs, Khalil Mullins had a pretty good first couple weeks, I thought, but I've been pretty critical about Donovan Edwards not being that every down running back that's going to break arm tackles or that's going to fall forward for a couple extra yards here and there. I thought those guys did their part too, that when there was a seam, okay, now they get hit at 3 yards, they get 5 or 6. So it's working in coordination. And by the way, not just the offensive line and the running backs, the tight ends, right? They want to load the box. They bring those guys in, whether it's Colston Loveland or Bredesen, Klein, whoever it might be. All those guys got to get on the same page together. And you started to see that gel a little bit more. Offensive line creating seams, running backs running hard, not a lot of missed assignments. It looked a lot better in week 3, and hopefully they can keep going with that. And with Orji, now you have that dynamic too that threatens the defense. So it should just continue to open up, more and more opportunities for the running game to get going.
Yeah, it'll open up the running opportunities, but I think especially behind this offensive line where, they found a rhythm in terms of running the ball. Pass protection has still been less than desirable. Yeah. And if you're going to have a less than desirable, we saw Davis Warren at the end of the Texas game get outside the pocket, try and make things happen. He hit Samaj Morgan for a touchdown. But at some point, if that's going to be the case, that also may have forced their hand to go with Alex Orji because he's a guy that can, as long as he has that awareness and the patience that if things are collapsing around me, when to pull the trigger of escaping the pocket. Sharon Moore, I was talking to him yesterday. He's pound for pound, he's as strong as any guy on the team. So he can break some tackles. He can get outside the pocket. He can extend some of those. And if 1 or 2 are not there, the tuck it and run it. Let's see what you could do. Put that defense in conflict. How many times have we talked about a mobile quarterback beating one of our teams and being frustrating just because they pick up a third down with their feet?
Yeah, when you're not playing perfect football and you're playing 10-man and one guy's making a mistake here and there, those, to your point, John, those are the types of players that you need to just make it right every once in a while. Hey, busted play, got pressure too early, didn't allow the routes to develop, we missed something, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have a better athlete who can make you right and find a way to still get that first down, keep the drive going. I think that's probably a big factor in the decision to go to Orji too.
You mentioned the running game, and you see the numbers there at the bottom. I don't think anybody would have projected that Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards would have the same number of carries through 3 games, and it's been very much earned. Mullings has really stepped up and transformed his game. You talked about getting a little leaner during the offseason, and I don't think I think Mullings has been more impressive than maybe Donovan Edwards has been, a little bit disappointing at times, but this is an opportunity for both those guys, especially when, if Michigan has success in this game, they're playing ahead in the score and with the sticks where, this could be a 70% run game type plan. If you also include in the run game plan, Alex Orji taking off and running, whether it's designed or improv.
If you think back to a lot of the big games, big opponents that Michigan's played in the last several years, there was always a wrinkle to the offense that was really creative, right? I mean, I think that's how Sharon ended up being the head man, right? There was in big games, there seemed to be some sort of, not even necessarily trick play, but just some creativity, right? They were motioning, there was misdirection, they were flipping the formation, they were doing things to put the defense in a bind, in an awkward situation, make some people have to think for a split second longer, and then that's how a big play bursts out, things like that. I would like to see them go back to some of that more, right? You don't have to be too fancy. You don't have to get over the top about it. You still want to run the football. You still want to control the line of scrimmage, control possessions, all of that. But being able to put that defense in a bind, make them have to think a little bit more, that's how a Donovan Edwards really gets going. That's how a 60-yard run bursts out all of a sudden, because the linebacker is still worrying about that shift the other way and what his coverage might be because he's trying to communicate with the safety, things like that. I think they have an opportunity now with Orji that he adds that extra wrinkle. He's a dynamic guy. We'll see how much they trust him to get the ball down the field. I agree with you, John. They're going to have to try. They're going to have to be successful. We'll see how much they go to it early and what they want to do with it. But some of those extra creative ways to make a defense pause and have to think, and you got a dual threat quarterback. Now, all of a sudden, you're thinking a little differently than what we've shown on tape the first 3 weeks offensively.
Well, and it makes it a lot easier for an offensive line that is still trying to gel, still trying to find their way. Yeah, they found it in the run game, but pass protection has been lacking. So if, like against Texas, when they run the flea flicker, all of a sudden, if you can just slow down that rush a split second, it makes things a little bit easier for the offensive line. It makes things a little bit easier and clearer for the quarterback. Now you get that run game going, the play action pass. I mean, there's no easier pass protection than a play action pass. You get a chance to run block knowing that your quarterback's going to be setting 7-8 yards deep, 7 steps deep. That, in and of itself gives you a little bit more confidence that, hey, I can do what I'm best at and still be able to pass the ball.
Yeah, no doubt. Defensively, Jack, assess the effort through 3 weeks. What have you liked and what has to be better heading into USC?
Well, I think it starts up front. It always does on both sides of the ball. I'd like to see the defensive line get going a little more, try to get pressure with 4 guys. We know Wink wants to blitz. We know that's his identity. That's what he's been doing for years. But everything becomes a lot easier if you can get home with 4 guys. And I don't think we've done a good enough job of that to date. The other thing is when you do blitz, you're leaving guys on an island. There's less guys back there to cover. And, it seems like the communication is still getting worked out a little bit. There's some guys, some holes in the defense, some things that, John knows this. It's almost like an offensive line where there's a cohesion that needs to happen between the guys in the secondary. They have to understand each other's calls and body language and what this guy does in this situation, what that guy does. There's just something about experience and reps together that create that. I think they've missed that a little bit. I think there's plenty of talent, obviously. Will Johnson and the big boys up front have done okay. They've been on the field a little too much. And Jay-Sean Barnum, I don't think he played terrific this past game, but he's done okay so far. They got plenty of talent. I think, again, it's one of those just trying to gel, trying to come together. It takes a little bit of time to do. Their offense has not done them any favors and kept them off the field and let them schemed up and made adjustments on the sidelines. That has certainly hurt them, I think. But like to see the communication improve, and they got to be able to get home with 4.
Well, yeah, getting home with 4 is obviously the answer. And they have, the first test was against Texas, and it was underwhelming. Now you've got a better offensive line than you faced in the other 2 non-conference games in USC, a young left tackle. How are you going to make them pay? How are you going to find a way to win a one-on-one matchup? Because they can't double team everybody up front, and especially those 2 big boys inside. You're going to have to get a win and put pressure on the quarterback, because I do think, I wouldn't be surprised to see them mirror exactly what Texas did. Hey, Will Johnson, you're great. We're not even going to throw at you. Texas didn't even throw at them, and they just went completely to the other side. So it's going to have to be in the secondary, Amir Hall, Jair Hill. It's going to have to be some of those guys that continue to play better. I thought they played better against Arkansas State, but Arkansas State is not going to be USC. It's not the same speed. It's not the same level of talent. And you're going to have to play better, but to help those guys out so they're not in pass coverage for 4, 5, 6 seconds, that's an impossibility. You're going to have to put pressure on the quarterback, get him off his mark, make him throw off his back foot, make him get outside the pocket, and then all of a sudden you can use the speed of, like a Derek Moore of being able to close on him and get a hit on him.
Yeah, Miller Moss from USC is a great quarterback. They always have a great offense there, great weapons. And if you don't get home with 4, you're going to pay the price. And especially with the way Wink wants to blitz, guys are going to shake open late if you don't get home. Josiah Stewart, the big play in the Rose Bowl. Derek Moore, I know we talked a lot about him in the offseason. Now you got a young left tackle coming into the big house. As a defensive line, you got to take that personally, that we have got to get after this guy. There's no excuse. There's enough talent up front there. They got to put it on them to go get the job done and help those guys out in the back end.
Last call for questions from the comments. We'll feature a couple at the very end. Just want to get out with a couple more with Jack Miller here on the show. If you could get 1 or 2 things locked in that Michigan can or will accomplish on Saturday in order to, kind of set the scene, right? If they do this or this, you really like their chances on Saturday against the Trojans.
I'd go back to the pass rush. I think that's probably key to making sure that they're disruptive in the passing game and that they control the line of scrimmage defensively. And then, look, you're going to go with Alex Orji. He's got to step up to it. He's got to play well. I doubt that they're going to ask him to do too much outside of his wheelhouse and stretch the field and drop back and, find timing routes down the seam. I don't think they'll ask him to do a whole lot of that, but when they do, you got to deliver. They got to help him out and give him a good game plan and find a way to confuse that USC defense. You're going to run the ball. He's going to run the ball. So does USC. You're going to have to be able to complement that with a few things. So when they take their chances, they got to be able to deliver on it. And then, like I said, they got to be able to get pressure on the quarterback defensively, get those guys off the field. Because if you keep giving the USC offense chances, they're going to find a way. They're going to make enough plays to get them off the field. And your offense has to score and sustain drives as best as possible.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to turnovers. And, you know, if you can find ways to get more opportunities for your offense, turn the ball over, turn it over in advantageous positions where, like, hey, take it against Fresno State, that first turnover, put them in the red zone or green zone, and now all of a sudden you go in for an easy score. Getting some of those against an opponent like USC to be able to get some easy scores, gain a little bit of confidence so you could then turn around and put together an 80-yard drive, put that defense in conflict. But it's going to be, I think, you know, it's imperative that they find a way to turn the ball over against USC.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of this comment, if Michigan isn't throwing 6 interceptions in 3 games, I think Davis Warren's starting, because I think we saw for as bad as the 3 interceptions were, we saw some of his best throws as a starter in the game against Arkansas State. The interceptions, that was the first thing that Sharon Moore said to John, to you in post game. And then Monday, when he was talking about the switch to Alex Orji, can't have turnovers, can't give up the football, because it set up a 10-point win. Now, I know it was a lot of garbage time, but it definitely didn't help matters against Arkansas State. They missed 2 field goals off the upright. That game looks a lot different if those go through, Arkansas State was hoping for. You just can't have it against USC or any team that has a pulse in the Big Ten.
And it comes down to decision making from the quarterback position. And with Alex, it's going to be a little bit different, right? You don't want to throw interceptions. He's going to have to be measured. They're going to be measured in the opportunities that they give him. But it's going to be, okay, how aggressive is he going to be in the run game? We know he's very athletic. We've seen him be aggressive, but is he going to strain for that extra yard and put the ball in jeopardy? Is he going to try and spin, and get hit in the back by a defender? What happens at that point? That's going to be the coaching point for Alex Orji. We love it that he's going to add this extra element, and he's going to be dynamic, and it's going to be exciting. But when you run the ball and you're running it like he will, that's where you've got to make sure that you are ultimately responsible for holding on to that ball and knowing sometimes it's just better to get down than take a hit and try and get that extra yard.
If Orji can give that spark, and to your point, John, play smart, right? Play efficient football, not turn it over, understand, get out of bounds here, don't force a pass there, those types of things. I think a lot of the mistakes and some of the corrections that need to be made, they are very correctable, right? I'm not throwing in the towel on this yet. There are a lot, we talked about it all offseason, a lot of new faces, players, coaches. That takes time to gel sometimes. I think that there's a lot of correctable things out there. Let's hope that when number 10 gets in this week, it's a little bit of a spark to say, all right, we got it. We've started to figure out an identity. And then once you do that, you can really start to get on a roll and find some rhythm, find some momentum on things. And so I think that's why they needed to shake it up this week. We'll see how it pans out. If he's able to do those things you're talking about, John, I think it starts to rally the team around, all right, we found something, we found someone. Now this is the direction we go forward.
Last thing, Jack. With the 12-team model, have you digested the early season results any differently? And what have been kind of your Big Ten and national takeaways through the first 3 weeks of action where, going into this past week, I would have said, I think Georgia and Texas are the top 2 teams in the country. Georgia barely won at Kentucky, and Quinn Ewers got hurt for Texas.
Yeah, I think that the game of college football is changing in more ways than we probably recognize all the time. These teams feel different every year because of transfer portal and NIL. You got a whole new batch of, 17 to 20-year-old young men that are sometimes unpredictable, and you don't know what you're getting into. Hence my last comment about, a lot of new faces this year. Sometimes that just takes time to figure out. I'm not putting a whole lot of stock into what we've seen thus far. We're getting closer to that as we're going to hit the halfway point in a few weeks to really start to see who shakes out where. But there is a lot to be decided still. There's a lot that can change. Not comparing it to the MLB, but John, I just heard you this morning talking about the Tigers, right? Who would have thought we'd be sitting here with them? There's a lot that can happen throughout the course of a year. And Brian, to get back to your point about expanding that to 12 teams, who knows what it's going to look like and where it's going to be? Who would have thought Texas and Alabama, at least last year, would be where they ended up, right? There's a lot that can play out still. That's why I think it's important to just, keep your head level right now. keep trying to get better, trying to fix the correctable things that you can, because you don't know how this thing is going to play out down the stretch.
Tigers,
Brian, I threw a little baseball in there for you. I know you like it.
Yeah, we started him giving us a hard time about being in the studio talking about sports for 4 hours, let alone this guy is sitting there sipping a coffee, drinking and listening to sports talk all morning. So
I mean, hey, you can Jack multitasks. You'll be all right. I'll tell you what though, no one wants to face the Detroit Tigers especially in that 3-game wild card series if they don't need to use Scooble on that last day of the regular season. That is, I don't care who they face. If they can get there, that 3-game series, the Tigers, I think, would be the favorite.
Well, I'm not going to give any baseball analysis. I just know they're hot right now, and you never know what can happen throughout the course of a year. So that's all I got for you guys there.
Oh, man.
You're just worried about hotness. That's it. Now we finally get down to the crux of the matter.
That's right. Jack, when's the tea time today?
Not today, sir. Tomorrow morning.
Oh, too much sunshine today. Too much.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to get done.
He'll have 97.1 on the Bluetooth speaker as he's teeing off on one, John.
As he should.
Last thing, John, yesterday, Teddy's 3rd birthday. How was it?
Oh, the cake was top notch, and icing, as you would imagine, we get the double icing. And then there was many different options of ice cream, from Mackinac Island fudge, chocolate chip cookie dough, vanilla, chocolate. And as being the leader of the household, the one that should be the tester, I've got to test all flavors and cake just to make sure it's safe for the family. I don't want to serve them any bad food.
It's thoughtful. It's very thoughtful.
Yes.
Dad
but yes,
he did make 3 candidate.
Yes, did make 3. So
I mean,
we've won for 3. No guarantees on what year 4 looks like.
No. There will be cake. I promise you that. There will be cake. All right. Well, fellas, looking forward to the broadcast on Saturday. Super thankful for the time. Thanks to all the questions, comments, viewers. Been fun bringing this to you. And next week, we've got the planned Jason Avant debut here on the stream. So I will work on a 7-second delay, and that'll take a while.
Yes. Good luck. You can only use it once, though. That's the problem.
I can just remove from stage.
Yes.
All right, fellas. We'll talk to you on Saturday. Thanks to all for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks.
Go Blue. Go Blue.